Well, welcome to this Journalist CME conversation focusing on topics within the 2025 special collection. The goal of our collection this year is to highlight the tremendous value that continuing professional development and continuing education has to healthcare. It helps healthcare professionals improve, it helps organizations improve. And a major aspect of this involves education to improve interprofessional teamwork. We know that effective care, it necessitates effective teamwork. And we're fortunate to have an expert with us today, Dr. Jennifer Graebe, who's done a lot of fantastic work in this space, and I'm looking forward to conversing with her about this. So, welcome, Jennifer.
Thank
So
you.
first, just you're grateful that you've served as an editorial board member for the special collection. And could you tell us and listeners a little bit about yourself, your background experience?
Sure. So I am a nurse by profession. I have been a nurse for just shy of 30 years. The majority of my career was in the emergency department, where I experienced likely interprofessional collaborative practice, slightly different than my peers that were working in other parts of the healthcare institution. I also worked in a level one trauma center. So teamwork and collaboration was critical in delivering really good care to patients in emergencies and traumas. And collaboration included good communication, respectful dialogue, sometimes good dissent around plans of care. I also, after that, became an educator in the emergency department, and I was responsible for not just nursing education, but also other members of the team education, the medical assistants, the medics that were working within the ED. But then I also collaborated with the GME program for the medical students and the medical residents. And I also taught ACLS and BLS. So again, another area where interprofessional collaborative practice is so critical. Then I became the manager slash director of that very emergency department. And then after that, I left and went to the American Nurses Credentialing Center, which is how I met you and was able to be a part of this great opportunity on the editorial board. And this is where probably the theory, well, first I identified that interprofessional collaborative practice was a real thing because it was cemented in theory and something that I don't think that practitioners can appreciate all the time when they're in the trenches of patient care, that what they're doing is actually based on research and rooted in theory and that it's been tested and that it is evidence-based practice. And really where I learned from leaders like Dr. Kathy Chappell, Kate Renier, Dr. Travalos on what the joint accreditation standards meant and have been a partner in that work for the last 10 years in their revision, well, their evolution really, and then their revision. And so right now, I continue to do that work not only on the joint accreditation side for interprofessional collaborative practice and education, but also for nursing continuing professional development. And one of the things that I really like about this role is looking at, from an accreditation perspective, from an ontological perspective, from a pedagogy perspective, what has been happening over the last decade among the accreditors who are also leaders in this space. And you've been a really important part of that work as well, is the systemness that we're seeing, that if the accreditors and the leaders and the subject matter experts in professional development, in practice, work-based learning can come together and find commonality, then in many ways we're living and breathing what we would expect to see from providers and teams that are working and taking care of patients. So it's been a really nice journey. And I'm very excited to see what the next decade holds in terms of professional development and specifically interprofessional continuing education.
Well, that's fantastic, and what an amazing career you've built and experienced. And thanks for sharing a bit about how you lived this on the front lines of care, and then evolved into your role as an educator and now regulator. of
Mhm.
education. And I think, you touched on something about joint accreditation. And for those um, listening or watching this, joint accreditation, it was a movement probably about 15, 16 years ago where some of the major accreditors in continuing education, the health professions got together to really encourage and advocate for interprofessional continuing education through a united process. It added a lot of efficiency from a provider point of view, but it also added a lot of incentive. And I applaud the accreditors for doing that, because where regulators encourage providers to go, providers go. And maybe you can just comment just at a high level. You've gotten to see really education programs at a macro
Mhm.
level
Mhm.
shift and all of a sudden start teaching things interprofessionally. And what stands out to you in terms of where the world is with interprofessional teamwork in continuing education?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. I think in general, it the shift has required not just the accreditors, but the providers literally to have a mind shift to approach education in the practice setting, which is often referred to as professional development, learning and development, to be more mindful and thoughtful about what's the end result, what are the outcomes that we hope to achieve, and from a servant, really leadership perspective, that it's not about completing forms. It's not about files. It's not about accuracy in the narration of, describing what a professional practice gap is, but it's really about that methodical, analytical, critical thinking approach to why is this education important? Who is it serving and targeting, and what do we hope they achieve at at the end of that educational intervention, and what are the outcomes that we hope to see long term? And I think that um, competency based, outcome driven approach is what is transforming in many ways what is occurring at the practice setting, in the practice setting, at the grassroots level, because education is transformational. End of day. If it wasn't, we wouldn't start at 4 or 5 years old that journey into formal education. But sometimes what happens with adult learning is that it actually is happening, is it becomes more punitive. It becomes more of a task rather than something that we need to engage in to transform us. And so when we think of that shift in the siloed education realm, and we look at what interprofessional continuing education is doing, is that it is actually also not just challenging the providers or the accreditors, but it's also challenging the learners. It's challenging the learners to be actively engaged in the learning process, to be held accountable to changing who they are, likely as a provider, and what they know to be true, their comfort zones. Interprofessional CE is very much aligned with, in my humble opinion, Carol Orchard's collaborative theory, collaborative practice theory, where we chip away at who's the leader, who's the ruler in the room, and really looking at understanding and respecting and trusting and valuing the roles and responsibilities of the other members of the team. What are they seeing that we're missing? And I think that was one of the things I touched on earlier that I experienced in the emergency room, but really in the trauma room. And it was a mind-blowing experience when the trauma surgeon who's running the trauma code looks at me, a nurse, and says, "Am I missing anything? Are you seeing anything that I'm missing?" Because that criticality of that moment of wanting to know, that humility first, but the critical moment of wanting to know if another member of the team had an idea or said, yes, actually, you missed this step in the head to toe assessment, meant a life or death situation for that patient. And so I believe that that's what interprofessional CE does. And it's, in a way, it kind of forces the education to drive what the team needs. And it's not just about the didactic. A lot of times it's about the relationships. How do we cure the relationships? How do we foster the relationships? How do we sustain the relationships of these teams working together for the betterment of the work that they do, but also the people that they serve, which are patients? So in my mind, that servant leadership theory is, it's like a trickle down effect. It starts at the top with the providers. Actually, it starts with us as the accreditors, right? And then it starts with the providers, and then it goes all the way down to really the probably the last point of where that education is going to be impacted or have that impact, and that's patients or communities, society as a whole. Mhm.
Yeah, that's a fantastic overview and reflection of the environment. You said a lot of important things there, and I think the encouragement and advancement and priority given to interprofessional continuing education, it really has challenged the environment. And you said something at the beginning of your comments that's really transformational, right? I mean, that's the best word. It's you've transformed continuing education and given
Mhm.
really a good priority, maybe an appropriate priority to
Mhm.
team-based continuing education. And I think that's important for us to remember, right? Teams always outperform individuals,
Mhm.
and all these health professions have grown up in siloed manners for good reason. They need to get trained in their different health professions, but then they need to focus in practice on teamwork, and that's
Right.
what interprofessional continuing education does.
I agree. And I think also when we think about what the teams are doing, their work is hard. Their work is very hard, but they're doing good work and they're doing the right work. And they have to put the time and the commitment and the rigor into taking care of patients in order to have the best possible outcome. And so I also look at interprofessional CE and professional development similarly, that this is not easy work. What providers of education do and why the accreditors have created guardrails around bias and influence, because it's not easy and there is rigor behind it and there must be a commitment. Someone recently said to me, it shouldn't be this hard to create an activity for 1 hour. We're not creating curriculum at the academic level, and I would argue that curriculum at the professional practice level requires far more rigor and commitment to quality and commitment to evaluating impact and outcomes, and particularly with team-based learning, than even on the academic side, because we have so many variables and forces that are pushing against providers that in the academic setting they don't have, right? There are brick walls around curriculum. There is no bias and influence, likely, right? There is no funding of industry in academic professional or academic learning. So I think when we look at it that way as well, and we look at it from the accreditor side, but also the provider side, and I sit in both worlds because I am a teacher as well. I am a facilitator of learning. That this shouldn't be easy. It should be challenging. It should be hard because it's the right thing to do for the people that we're serving.
Yeah, yeah, and you're absolutely right. It's a good work. It's a hard work,
Mhm.
and that I think is a good link back to what brought us to chat about this today, Jennifer, which is we're doing this special collection to shine a big spotlight on the value of continuing education as a field, right? It's
Mhm.
important that education and the work that we're doing is noted and shared and disseminated, the great outcomes that we have,
Mhm.
and spending time and encouraging those in our community to reflect, write, and research around interprofessional continuing education and share that is really important. So what advice would you give to prospective authors? Like, what would you think is really important that our literature has in it about interprofessional continuing education?
Great question. I think that what I would say is brag. I believe a lot of times in this work, we're pretty humble. We don't, it's like, oh yeah, we did this and we had great outcomes, but maybe it's not worth publication, or I'm not a good writer, or I've never published before. I think we have to be better at communicating, I'll use your word, disseminating the outcomes, because otherwise, people outside of our world, and what these providers are doing to impact system outcomes, patient outcomes, team-based outcomes, if that work is not disseminated, no one knows it exists. And there are really great examples of how interprofessional CE, team-based learning, is impacting system goals, community outcomes, how it is improving. I just had a conversation with a group the other day around how their team-based professional development, IPCE, is improving the wellness and resilience of the people that are working within their organization. Things like that need to be disseminated. Yes, publication needs to be, articulate and clean, but I think just start writing and take a risk in submitting your publication, because I hope I can say this. I mean, I'm an editor for another journal. If it doesn't meet the metric for publication, you will be given the opportunity to revise in some cases, or feedback for future resubmission. And so I think for all of us, this is also a learning opportunity where we can tap into our own professional development in terms of how do we become stronger at disseminating the good work that we're doing. Because again, I'm going to circle back to, if it's not in the literature, there's not going to be the evidence that other people need to be able to go on these learning journeys in improving teamwork and collaboration, because the evidence just won't be there. So I think take a risk and understand that dissemination is critical in supporting the work long term. That's part of the sustainability, and that's part of having your work become a larger part of the community of practice.
I love it. I think that I think a listener needs to hear and be reminded the work you're doing is important, and
Yes.
brag about it. I like how you
Yes.
put it, just brag about it.
Just
And
brag.
the mechanism we have to do that is journals. And I'm so grateful the Journal of CME is spending time wanting to collect this and share it. And we're going to have hopefully a whole bunch of brag stories.
Yes.
And I love
Maybe
also love
that's
the
what we should have
encouragement.
called the special edition, the brag stories.
The brag stories, yeah,
Yeah.
because it could be a commentary around what
Hmm.
you're doing with really cool interprofessional activities. Showcasing
Hmm.
outcomes could fit there. It could be a brief report,
Right.
and for those that have spent the time, it could be a research article too. So there's different article types
Hmm.
where one could take a look at the work they're doing and brag about it. So
Yes.
definitely appreciate that, Jennifer. And any other advice that you'd have for anyone listening, watching?
In terms of submitting for the journal, or just in general around
Well,
professional
I think
development or
you
IPCE?
touched on a lot. You touched
Yeah.
on how
Hmm.
interprofessional teamwork is really important, and
Hmm.
educators play a big role in ensuring teamwork advances. So it could be what's next, what you encourage educators to do with interprofessional education, or
Hmm.
submitting, right? I mean, ultimately we
Yeah.
want this to be bragged upon, but people do need to be reminded of the work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think and this would be perhaps something that could likely be maybe a special edition in the future if we're thinking about evolving. I believe that in order for um CME, NCPD, IPCE, all of those things, learning and development in general, to have a future, and that's really the solvency and the sustainability focus that I have is we also have to think about how else or in what other ways can learners use evidence of their learning. And I believe that even within the world of IPCE, there is opportunity to develop learning journeys and learning portfolios, because I often think about if this work is truly team-based, then there's a likelihood that we may have some unlicensed members of the team that are a part of interprofessional CE activities. And how can those experiences be used to stack or scaffold towards academic degrees, whether that's in the health professions or health administration. So I believe that we have to start, if we really want to start looking at IPCE holistically, we have to also think about how can that be used to support a learner in a different way. And a lot of times I believe that the licensed professionals, um, there is some conduit or transaction, and I hate using that word, where completion of education can be used in different ways, whether it's to support, certification, board certification, to support licensure. For nurses, it is now being used for recognition of prior learning. So they're mapping at professional development courses to academic curriculum. But I often think about how we have a duty or some obligation to use IPCE as a way to encourage or entice other members of our teams and other professionals that may not be licensed healthcare providers to think about, maybe this is the time for me to go into the health professions. I've always wanted to do it, but now there's been a pathway created for me. So I think IPC is a great way to start to think about that, because if we're pulling in folks into these sessions for the greater good, right? For the betterment of society, for the betterment of the team, our patients, what else can we do for them? And I think that is going to start to be, in my humble opinion, the future of IPCE, is that it is going to become a pathway into the health professions for those learners that are employees of those organizations, where they're learning but also working. And that does have a hand in glove impact, because the more an employee is supported to grow and learn and grow, really, because the human brain requires it, and they can see a pathway, a trajectory of where they will be within that organization over a period of time, they're more likely to do a few things. One, stay. So now you're tracking retention. And this is maybe not just for the providers of education, but also for the CEOs and the CFOs that support the providers of the education. But I believe we have to start thinking this way. And if any of the listeners were at AME last week, we heard that or 2 weeks ago loud and clear, that educators need to be at the policy table, at the decision-making table. But we also have to come with ideas. Retention, which also leads to financial health of an organization when you have reduced retention. But also, an employee is more likely to recommend their employer, their healthcare organization, for care. And they're also more likely to refer. So again, it has this trickle down impact where if an employee is supported, learning and development is not a benefit per se in terms of, we're going to pay for you to go to a conference. Learning and development is a benefit when an employer says to an employee, we are going to take you on a learning journey as long as you work here, and this is what it's going to look like, and these are the pathways that you can take to continue your employment here in different roles if you choose. That's powerful stuff.
Well, yeah, that's a lot there, and
Yeah.
it's a great encouragement, and ultimately a reminder of how important education,
Yes.
the role of education plays in this whole environment. And I want listeners to take away that, you know, transforming your continuing education into interprofessional continuing education, it's complex, but it's worth it. It's going
Yes.
to make learners more effective as
Hmm.
team members. It's going to make teams more effective, and it's going to make organizations better. And Jennifer, I thank you for touching on all of that and encouraging those in our community to make this a priority, because it's important work. You know, you said that it's good work, it's hard work,
Hmm.
and I want to encourage people to make this a priority in your work, and then also make it a priority to share about it, because that is something
Yes.
that is important for our environment to be reminded of. So again, thank you, Jennifer, for your time. I really
Thank you for
appreciate it.
having me.
It's nice to connect with you, and
Yes.
it's nice to chat about interprofessional continuing education. So thank you.
Thank you.